Our next speaker is Leonie. She studied history at the University of Bremen and at the University of Dresden. She's currently finishing her master there, and she is a little exception around today because she is not focusing on ancient history, much more she is specialized in the, let us say, more darker chapters of German history in the Third Reich. So she worked on the discrimination of homosexuals in the Third Reich and also on women resistance. She was one of the winners of an essay competition on women resistance and published already a little article on this topic. And she works also a lot about the reception of the Roman and Greek world and the Nazi ideology. And today she will present us something from this research. She wants to present us today a paper with the title Aryans as Founders of Classical Empires, Ancient Foundation Myths and National Socialist Ideology. So we are very excited for this little trip into the reception world.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction, and also thank you to Altai for giving me the opportunity to present something from my field of research today. So when we were talking about the project and you were telling us about the workshop, I was actually immediately thinking about the obsession the Nazis had with antiquity, and I was just wondering what role ancient founding myths might have played for them. So that's actually what I want to talk about today. And since most of you are ancient historians, or at least more interested in like ancient history than modern history, I just want to start with showing you a picture, or more like two pictures. Wait a second. Does it work?
Back again one more time.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay.
So at least one of these persons should be familiar with you. And I just want you to like have a look, and yeah, maybe you will recognize some similarities between those two. Yeah, right. So yeah, I think it's pretty obvious. So both of them are blonde and blue-eyed, I think. Do you see it? No? Oh, okay. So at least according to this man right here, they are blonde, they have blue eyes. And yeah, if you didn't know that as ancient historians, that's a little embarrassing for you, but I can overlook that, it's okay. But yeah, so this man was one of the leading scientists and authors in the field of racial theory during the Nazi era in Germany. And so yeah, in one of his many books, he had these images printed and labeled these people as Nordic, as you can see. And these two individuals are representative of Nordic people, they would most likely have to be blonde and have blue eyes. And however, these two people, the Hellenic woman and Pericles, are just two examples. So in his book, he also deals with many other ancient figures, including also female figures that are relevant in founding myths. So today I would like to focus on these texts and yeah, his reception of these figures. And therefore my question for today is, what role did ancient founding myths and female figures play for storytelling and identity construction in Nazi Germany? So I will primarily use the texts of Hans Günther, the man you have just seen. So I would first like to briefly talk about him and his academic background, and then I will very briefly talk about his basic theories on races, and yeah, go on and show you some quotes and talk about the actual women in founding myths and their reception, and end with a conclusion. So yeah. Yeah, so Hans Günther, I guess most of you haven't heard of him actually. He was born in 1981. He was a writer, an advocate of scientific racism, and a eugenicist. he studied philology, zoology, and geography. So actually his major was philology, but he also used to go to other classes like zoology and geography. And later he also studied at the Anthropological Institute of the University of Vienna. And in 1930, the chair of social anthropology was established just for him at the University of Jena, and he also taught in Berlin and Freiburg. So he actually had a significant influence on Nazi racial ideology. So he has published several books on the ethnology and racial history of various peoples. So as you can see, there are many of those, and these he attempts to explain the history and the development of these people and deals with the characteristics that, according to him, define them. And I am gonna primarily talk about the middle one, so yeah, maybe you've noticed that these books are also from before 1933, when the Nazis took over, but I just used these as an example because actually his books got published many, many times over the years. So he was very popular actually. So yeah, let's first talk about like the basic things you need to know when we're talking about race theory. So the first thing you need to know is that according to Günther, there are 6 races in Europe. Of course, there are many more, but we're gonna just talk about the European ones. And I just want to say one more thing here, because in Germany, the word race is understood very differently from in English-speaking countries. So while the word is more neutral in English, I think we in Germany we just don't use it anymore because of the dark history it has, but also like other people use it in relation to humans, and in Germany it's more like used for animals. So we wouldn't do that. But Günther divides Europe into 6 races. And he was also like creating maps and stuff and attempted to identify where each race can be found. So for us today, the Nordic race will be important, which can be found in today's Germany, according to him, and most of Scandinavia. Then secondly, according to him, every race has different physical and mental characteristics. So the Nordic race, these people are mostly very tall, they're like very slim, they have a long head, a narrow face, very, very light skin color, often blue or at least very light brown hair. They have very light or blue eyes, and he actually doesn't say as much about their personality, but they are definitely brave and loyal. So yeah, with that being said, let's have a look at what exactly he said about the figures in founding myths. So I'm going to read this part to you. By the way, all of the quotes are from his book Racial History of the Hellenic and Roman People. So, the authentic Hellenists of early Hellenic history are depicted as Nordic people, and the poetic descriptions of gods and goddesses are based on the image of Nordic people. The gods and heroes of the Iliad are blonde, as are those of the Odyssey. The Iliad describes Athene as blue-eyed, Demeter as blonde, Aphrodite as golden-haired, Amalthea as blonde among the Nereids, Achilles, Menelaus, and Meleager as blonde among the heroes, and Helen, Briseis, and Agamede as blonde among the women. The Trojan Hector, on the other hand, is described as black-haired a stranger, and an enemy. So, as you can see, he is naming many figures and goddesses of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and all of them are obviously blonde and blue-eyed. And he also goes more into detail when talking about Helen. So he says, Helen's beauty is described in more detail. Her silky soft blonde hair, her almost transparent eyes, her rosy cheeks and red lips, her dazzlingly fair skin, her slender white hands, in other words, all Nordic racial characteristics. So here it is basically the same thing. And I'm gonna read one last quote for you. The Odyssey again refers to Athene as blue-eyed and Aphrodite as golden-haired, Rhadamanthus and Aurora as blonde. Among the heroes, the Odyssey again refers to Menelaus as blonde, and among the women, Penelope and Hermione. The kinship of Penelope with early Germanic female figures, a kinship especially in terms of psychological traits, has often been felt. So once again, he describes the typical Nordic characteristics of various ancient figures. But what's also interesting is that, however, he tries to draw a direct connection between Penelope and like the German figures, also in terms of inner character traits. So those are just some quotes. He's also talking about Medea being blonde and blue-eyed, actually. But I think you already understand what he's trying to do here, so I'm gonna break down this whole argumentation now. So basically, when he's trying to explain the origin of ancient empires, in this case, he's talking about Greeks. He basically says the Hellenic gods and goddesses and heroes are of Nordic descent. So that's why he's giving all those examples with ancient figures with Nordic characteristics. So that would mean that the Hellenes, like the historical Hellenes, are of Nordic descent, right? So this is at least how he does explain it. So according to Günther, the Aryans and Dorians are the bearers of the Nordic race. That's what he says. So they were the ones bringing the elements of the Nordic race to Greece through the Nordic migration. And yeah, so that resulted in the Achaean families ruling as a small upper class of predominantly Nordic races, a Nordic race over non-Nordic lower classes. Right, so that means the ancestors of the Hellenes, especially the Hellenic upper class, that was the Nordic race. So now we know where they come from, but we also have got to ask what happened to them then. And I'm gonna jump to the next quote. So this is like the before of the downfall of the Greek empires. And he says, in art, the early Hellenic view of women as both highly esteemed and sensual can be traced back to the 5th century. Indeed, the statecraft of the 5th century is still characterized by a high idealization of women, while at the same time recognizing women as only as mothers and viewing their sexual lives as something distant and unrelated to their own interests. But there's much more, so this is what happens then. This is also the last very long quote. With the demise of Hellenic customs in the 4th century, after the destruction of the most valuable ancestral tribes of the Hellenic tribes by the Peloponnesian War, the practice of hetairai spread and forced the declining art into its service. As the Nordic race declined, women as wives became increasingly less free, while women as free courtesans, especially as educated lovers, who freely gave their favors, became increasingly uninhibited and knew how to secure more and more legal freedoms for themselves. As the position of the wife became increasingly restricted by the hetairai, enjoyed a great deal of freedom and were able to appear in public as companions of men, often companions in their intellectual pursuits. Many freedom-loving, beautiful, and talented Hellenic women may have preferred the life of hetairai, a life that most likely left them with few or no children. So that was a very long part, but I'm going to summarize what Günther says about the reasons for the downfall of the Hellenes. So before the downfall, there is actually, like I said, a Nordic upper class and a non-Nordic lower class. There are no marriages with anyone of another race, and women have the role as being a mother, and there's like no sexual autonomy. But then everything changes. So first of all, the remaining wealth attracted foreign merchants and hetairai, which were coming to Greece then, he says. And then there's also the Peloponnesian War. There are internal conflicts. So these two things already, in the perspective of the Nazis, already led to the destruction of the Hellenic tribes and the racial mixing, as he says, with the non-Nordic races. At the same time, this leads to moral decay and sexual licentiousness. Is that right? Okay. So according to him, foreign races spread the worshipping of Aphrodite and the practice of the hetairai. And according to Günther, I quote it, women with high quality genetic material are removed from reproduction. What remains are childless women. So yeah, apparently the main problems they have the mixing of different races. So the Nordic blood is no longer just Nordic, and the women are having relationships, but they're not reproducing. Or as Günther says, the decline of the original Nordic element or the blood of the upper class. Athens' creative power is dwindling, which means the downfall of the Hellenes. So, but what does this actually tell us about storytelling and identity constructions? So, in the myths, there were settlers from a culture or a specific civilization coming to a new region or a new place. They were bringing their culture, and after some time, they were often reproducing with locals, often through the women, and the result of that is that there are mixed identities, or a combination of identities. So in the Greek foundation myths that we know, that is often seen as a positive thing, and it often demonstrates the rise of a city or an empire. But in the Nazi reception, you can actually see like the same narrative pattern as in the Greek foundation myths. So they first use the same pattern when it comes to explaining the rise of an empire, but for the Nazis, the mixing of the identities, or in this case of the races, marks the downfall of the civilization of these colonies or this Nordic culture. So we can actually see how the same narrative structures are used, but in this case, they're evaluated quite differently. And this version also reflects the racial ideology of the National Socialists. So the intention here is to legitimize the racial doctrine, actually. As we're seen in this version, the downfall is driven by the mixing of races and the failure of the master race, as calls it, because women are not reproducing, and this is also consistent with the racial laws and the fact that marriage with other races was prohibited in Nazi Germany. Yeah, so and if we see it like that, the history of Greece and Rome, because he does say the same thing for Rome actually, can also be understood as like a warning to not repeat the mistakes of the past. Otherwise, the Third Reich will also have its downfall. Yeah, so nevertheless, this here reveals the same legitimization strategy that we know from early areas like the medieval times. So here too, an attempt to legitimize oneself by establishing a connection to an ancient advanced civilization is made. So even though in this case the Nazis actually switch the roles and present themselves not as descendants of the Hellenes, but as their ancestor, it is still an attempt, I think, to create a connection between the Hellenes and the Germans. So they actually try to establish their own significance through their connection to another culture of truly great relevance, they would say. So we can see that not only does the narrative structure remain the same, but also on a meta level, the purpose has not changed at all after all those centuries. It's more like it developed. So besides instrumentalizing it for propaganda, it is still about constructing one's own identity. So the content of the narrative can be ideologically adapted and instrumentalized, but the narrative structure itself remains the same. So that is basically what I wanted to show you. I can show you my literature and my sources, and then I will thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So these have been some very interesting, but also maybe a little bit weird perspectives for nowadays society. And I think there will be many questions to these other patterns we have seen. So the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thanks, Leonie. That was a very interesting, different perspective, different in some regards, but then also some intriguing overlap. Let me start with one footnote confirming one of the explanations you gave at the beginning of how the term race is used in Germany. I remember in my education in Germany, I was often told there are no human races, there's just one human race, but there are different ethnics that are socially construed by picking different features, whether they are physiognomical or cultural or religious features, but they can actually randomly be chosen in order to create an inside or an outside group, but that's not biologically defined. So that's how I learned it, and that would certainly back up what you are saying. And yes, sometimes the discourse here in North America I do find confusing, because I often feel that the term is used randomly and in very different ways, and it's often not easy to voice any kind of criticism or even ask critical questions, even if they are geared towards understanding. It's a very sensitive issue that I think academia should have the duty to elucidate and to put on a stronger footage. So all the work you are doing is actually an excellent contribution towards fostering a deeper and clearer understanding what ethnicity and race may actually mean, what the effects of certain definitions may entail, devastating effects they may entail, depending on how the information is used. So that's one comment. I have a little question. When you were concluding towards the end, you were saying, well, different and not so different, similar patterns that would define ethnic identity. What you have not said as clearly as I was expecting to receive an answer from you, I don't have the answer, is whether Günther at any time considered the Greeks or Romans as ancestors or as ethnically related to the Germans, or is that implied in the notion of Nordic? Because you, after explaining what Nordic means, you basically said that he used them as an example of how empire or imperial nations may rise and fall, as a warning, which does not necessarily imply that they are related to the Germans or let alone their ancestors. So perhaps can you elaborate a little bit on the relation of the Greeks and Romans to the Germans in the works of Günther?
So yeah, according to him, they are actually both related to them. So it's not like he's only giving an example of what could happen, but he actually says, so this is what he's trying to do. So he says the Nordic race, those are the ancestors. They came from another place, and those are the ancestors. Then there were the Greeks, and they are actually related. So that's what I meant when I say he's switching. Like he's not saying, okay, they are the Greeks and we are their descendants. So it's the other way around. And that and the thing with always saying like, okay, they're blonde, they have blue eyes. That is like the proof for him that they must be related.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Okay, yeah, it does. It does. It reverses. It reverses the order, and then I get it clear.
I would like to add something before we go to the next question, because I've also read something of Günther about the, let us say, reconstruction of the Germans, or I guess you say in the English world, Teutons for the ancient Germans. And I think also there he's constructing the idea that the Romans and the Greeks are both descendants of the Germans, but for just a certain time. So in the, let us say, rise of the Republic and the rise of the Greek world during the 5th century, these are, when I understand it right, they are Aryans, right?
Yeah.
And then comes both in the Greek and Roman world this mixing, and when the time comes and there are the encounters with the German, they are so much mixed so that the old, let us say, Aryans in this narrative are not more in Rome. So there are not two Nordic cultures that can encounter each other. It's very confusing, and I think he tries to find some way to explain that he's switching at this time when these Teutons arrive at the in the text of Caesar. So
yeah, so he likes to say that the German people are related to them as long as they're like a big empire and actually popular. But as soon as there's the downfall of an empire, he's like, okay, we don't know them because of this race being where races get mixed up. So that's the explanation for him.
Eva, you had a question.
Thank you so much, Leonie. I was wondering whether Günther was Elon Musk's favorite child reading or something as you were talking. But surprisingly enough, when it comes to the downfall of empires, somehow the women have the upper hand. Yeah. Where are the men in all this business? Is my question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's a good question. So yeah, I actually didn't say that. He is also talking about men. And he's saying, yeah, so there are also men and they're having something going on with women of other races, but he really does focus on women, which because they are the ones either of another race or they are the ones that don't want to have kids anymore. They're prostitutes or something like that. So it's the women's fault.
I'm really surprised he doesn't revert to the usual misogynistic Greco-Roman argument, which would be for the women to run wild, the men are weak.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what you would find in Plutarch and Diodorus and all these fantastic guys.
Oh, that's interesting. I think he doesn't say that, so it's actually just, of course, he does talk about men, but mostly it's about women, and he's not even like, there are people that are even worse, like Alfred Rosenberg. So for him, it's just the woman going crazy, actually. So, I forgot what I wanted to say. Yeah.
We can talk about it later.
Yeah,
I know it's jet lag.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation and its material. I don't know myself. I was struck when you were talking about Aphrodite. I'm sure there are many contradictions in his work, but on the one hand, he seems to be using Aphrodite in some of the quotations that you gave as an example of a kind of Nordic figure, contrary to all the evidence of her Eastern origins, which were, I think, well known at that period. But then on the other hand, later she's connected to the rise of the Hetairai, and the worship of Aphrodite is connected to the prostitute. So how is she actually functioning in his logic? Clearly broken, but
yeah. So that is a good question, because that is actually something the Nazis do very often. Like they form these things for what they're trying to say. So as long as he can say Aphrodite is blonde and blue-eyed, and it serves his argumentation, he's gonna say that. And like 3 pages later, he's gonna say the complete other thing, but he doesn't explain it any further. So I don't know if they were hoping like that nobody was questioning it actually, but these figures can change the roads very quickly. If it does fit the argumentation, yeah.
Yes, and also you mentioned briefly about Medea also being blonde, which is quite surprising because she's such an Eastern figure from Caucasus, and she, in Greek tradition, she is that otherness person in myth, but then he seems to just absorb her into this Nordic tradition because she got like this blonde-haired feature in some documents.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Well, I actually feel like he's just using names everyone would know, saying like, okay, the blonde, they have blue eyes. Like nobody would ever look that up or something. And the funny thing, I didn't quote it, but he actually is saying the barbaric woman, which is blonde and blue eye, Medea. And I was like,
but geographically, maybe she's northern enough,
right?
To have those characteristics.
Yeah.
If I may add, I would have had exactly Wendy's question as well, but possibly because of romantic paintings always represent her as dark-haired, and we think of a witch. I don't know any ancient epithet that would characterize her hair color, but then she is the granddaughter of Helios.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she or if her aunt Kirke is qualified. Andrew, do you happen to know any epithet of her, or how Kirke's hair is characterized? Because one would then assume that they have the same hair color as being.
I think she's blonde in Homo. Or how about,
I don't know. I'm just trying to bring it together because I was also struck by that choice. But then she is so everything that's Colchian and living in that area was considered Scythian, like the Amazons, Scythians, Iranians, Persians, Aryans. There is a lot of wishy-washy you might do, but it would be interesting to, if there is a rationale behind it, or if it's just random. I would not want to downplay everything as completely random, so I try to give them credit, at least in trying to build a pseudo-scholarly argument.
Maybe an idea? Oh, do you wanted to say something?
No. So just, I think I just checked. Circe has lovely hair.
This must be
Or maybe it says fair hair. Voila. That's it.
You just, before there is with a question, I just want to add to the discussion of media. I think here also the Indo-Germanistic studies are relevant. And I think in the time of the Nazis, there was a common knowledge that there have been some connections to the Near East and the Iran and Persia. Maybe this is the association that the Caucasus is not so far away from Persia. Maybe because of that, it is possible there are persons like these. So this was be just an idea. But you had a question.
Thank you, Leonie. I have not a question, but I was thinking about the fact about the contradictions. Like Aphrodite is the beautiful Nordic goddess, and then she is the moral sinner kind of thing. And by he focuses on the woman, I think it's the same thing, because either women don't want to have children, but if the mixing of the races happens, then the women are the ones who have the next generation, manifest that mixing of races and kind of, speeds up that downfall. So the women are both very, contradict to marry either you don't want to have children, that's bad. But if that mixing happens, then you have the children, it's also bad.
Right.
Because
that makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right. And then they shouldn't have children, actually, because if they do,
because
then the mixing is so obvious.
Up the process that he doesn't want to see happen. Because when we have a next generation of a mixed marriage or like mixed relation, then there's no stopping it. It happened, and you have a proof it happened. There's no turning back.
Yeah, that's right. And now I remember what I wanted to say. So he's actually focusing on men and women, but mostly women. And I think it makes sense because when you look at the Nazi times and the role that women had, so they had to do many things, but it was about reproducing, having kids. So as Doro said, if they did not reproduce or did it with the wrong race, they would be the ones that whose fault it is. So
I would like to add maybe the last question. So I would be interested if these stories about the Aryans and the Romans in this book can be regarded as, let us say, a reply to the Italian fascism under Mussolini. So you probably know Mussolini wanted to show that the Italians are the descendants of the old Romans. They had this big building projects and archaeological projects in Rome and want to say, hey, we have this very big ancient tradition of the empire. And is this maybe, let us say, a German response to say, okay, it's fine, you have your empire of the Romans, but in reality, this was an Aryan empire from the north, so you can have not the success you wanted, something like that. So your success is our success. So all, let us say, the successes of the Roman Empire are in some sort the successes of, let us say, the Aryans?
Yes and no, because I don't know if it's an answer for like the Italian fascism and stuff. I think they just want everyone's success, because I remember when they found like mummies with blonde hair in like Egypt or India, they were like, so there was a big empire. You see, these mummies have blonde hair, they must be Nordic too. So we've been there too. This is all our empire. So they did that like everywhere.
Okay, every empire is a Nordic empire at the end.
Yeah, so as soon as there was
also East Asian.
So
empire.
It was in like maybe Egypt, and I don't know if it was India or something like that, but
well, with Sanskrit at least there would be a linguistic pseudo argument.
Yeah, but as soon as they found someone with blonde hair, they would claim it, and they had
as long as they're on the winning side.
Yeah,
Iron.
right. So, or as long as they could put up argumentation that would prove it. Yeah.
Okay, then I want to thank you for the very interesting talk, and also all of speakers of this panel here for the very interesting presentations and for the very fruitful discussions and questions from you all. So thank you very much for that, and let us give them love.